Welcome everybody to the African Doctoral Academy Masterclass. My name is 𝗦𝘁𝗶𝗶. I'm the Program Manager at the African Doctoral Academy, and I'm joined by our guest speaker, Dr. 𝗵𝗶𝗶 and my colleague 𝗬𝗂𝗵𝗵. Dr. 𝗵𝗶𝗶 is a senior lecturer in the Center for Higher and Adult Education in the Department of Curriculum Studies at the Faculty of Education at stellenbosch University. Her postgraduate supervision and research expertise are concerned with critical exploration of learning technologies and the context within which they are used. Dr. 𝗬𝗵 will be speaking on the topic of thinking qualitatively, how to plan and structure a defendable and systematic qualitative study for your postgraduate research. We'll be opening the floor to questions after the presentation, so please feel free to ask your question in the chat or Q&A section, and my colleague 𝗬𝗂 will be assisting with questions after the presentation. Just a reminder to everybody joining the session, it is being recorded and it will be made available on our YouTube channel. The links can also be found on our website. So welcome, and I'll now hand over the platform to Dr. 𝗬𝗵. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be with you here today to discuss qualitative research. I just need to start off with a little disclaimer and say that we run a qualitative research course, an introduction to qualitative research course for the African Doctoral Academy, which is 5 days long. Today, I only have about an hour. So there's only so much that we can share in an hour, but we hope that it will whet your appetite and get you thinking qualitatively, which is the purpose of the session today. Okay, so as already been mentioned, my name is 𝗵𝗶𝗶, and I'm based at stellenbosch University. And the title of my presentation today is Thinking Qualitatively. So as the title suggests, I will focus more on the thinking part, because a lot of thinking goes into the planning of your qualitative research study. It's not something that just happens, and it's not something that just comes together. There isn't always a perfect formula. I love formulas, but there isn't always a perfect formula. But it is important to think very critically about how you plan and how you structure your qualitative research study, and make sure that the process you follow is systematic, it's defendable, it's rigorous. Otherwise, if you do not do that, then it actually puts the scientific merit of your study into question. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today, the thinking part of it. Okay, so as has been mentioned in the introduction, I'm based in the Center for Higher and Adult Education, which is in the Faculty of Education. I coordinate our postgraduate diploma in higher education and our 𝗬𝗶𝗶 in higher education. We have 2 master's programs. I also supervise on the PhD in higher education and the PhD in lifelong learning programs. And under those programs, we've got a dual doctoral program with Coventry University, where we have 10 PhD students. I supervise some of those. And I'm also supervising a dual doctoral degree student who's registered in Belgium. And then in our center, we've got a postgraduate supervision conference that takes place every 2 years. Out of this conference, we actually always have a publication. I'm currently working with a colleague to co-edit from our conference, which took place earlier this year, and we are going to have the publication coming out later this year. We usually have a lot of postgraduate supervisors attend, but we also have postgraduate students presenting on their experiences of being supervised. And then I also work in partnership with a number of centers and departments within the institution. Our division for research development, I work on their supervision training course. So, and then the Center for Research on Evaluation, Science and Technology, CREST, I also work on their online training course for doctoral supervisors, from which we've actually managed to get a publication, which I'll show you just now. And then the Center for Capacity Development in Africa, which is responsible for the ADA and the masterclass that we're having today. So I work a little bit on the ADA since the beginning of this year, and also previously on their Emerging Scholars Initiative. These are some of the students that have graduated under my care or under my watch. master's student. She was my second master's student and my first two PhD students who have completed their studies with me. So as was mentioned in the introduction, my specific expertise is in educational technology. And from a very critical lens, that means I'm interested in cultural aspects that affect technology. I'm interested in power dynamics. I'm interested in marginalization and things like that. So you will see from the titles of some of my publications that there's a very critical element in the way that I approach the use of technology in higher education, looking at relationship with technology, cultural transformation, and things like that. Okay. And then being vulnerable in our exploration of technology. The book on the right-hand side of your screen comes out of the course that I told you earlier, and the chapters in the book were written by colleagues, doctoral supervisors from about 16 countries across the continent, across the African continent, and these were developed from their assignments for a doctoral supervision course that we were teaching. Okay, so that is enough about me, just to tell you a little bit of what I do. I'm now going to go into the presentation proper. So before we actually get into qualitative research, I think it's important that we have a quite a general or an agreed upon understanding of what research itself actually is. Research is a systematic investigation of a question, phenomenon, or a problem using certain principles. It is important to consider the word systematic when you're thinking about research, whether it's a qualitative or a quantitative research study or mixed method study, and I'll talk a little bit about those just now. But it is important that the research is systematic and that it is in response to a particular question, a particular phenomenon, or a particular research problem that you have identified and you are exploring. And there are very specific principles that you need to follow in order to do that. So you ask questions about some phenomenon that is puzzling. You need to make sure that you don't already know the answers to the questions or the solution to the particular phenomenon. Otherwise, what is the point of the study? Then you go about searching for answers through the use of data and explanations of that data. So as I've said, it is important that the process is systematic, and then it needs to be rigorous, and it also needs to be defendable. It's interesting when I've spoken to some people who have never used qualitative research before, they may be interested or they may have some doubts about its validity and so on. These are the kinds of questions that they have. Is it systematic? Is it rigorous? Can I actually defend what I'm doing? And it's interesting, when I went and I posted a question on ChatGPT, I was looking for a picture. I wanted a picture that would actually reflect the difference between thinking qualitatively and thinking quantitatively. I was interested to see what ChatGPT would give me. And this is what I got. I actually giggled to myself when I saw this initial picture. And I thought, okay, maybe I didn't ask the question well. But when I looked at the picture, I was thinking, okay, so qualitative research is for females and quantitative research is for males. And according to ChatGPT, it's about feelings. Qualitative research is really about feelings, and we are a happy bunch and that kind of thing. And quantitative research is the more serious stuff, you know. We mean business when we are looking at quantitative research. So it was interesting to see that, because I think to some degree, this may be a reflection of how people view these different types of approaches to research. So I tried to refine my prompt, but I got something quite similar again, although maybe worse. I don't know if it's worse. So I was trying to figure out what that scribble under qualitative research actually is. I wasn't sure what it is. I don't know if it refers maybe to the messiness of qualitative research, which it actually is. You get loads and loads and loads of data, and you have to figure out what to do with that mass of data. But it was interesting that qualitative researchers are working with pen and paper. I didn't understand that connotation, while quantitative researchers are using technology for what they do for their analysis or their data collection and so on. All right, so as I looked at these two pictures, what came to my mind was the happy hippies with bright colors, female hearts and smiles and all of that. And then the serious statistics, where there's a male, laptop, means business. You can just see from the expression, we're not playing around here, you know. And it got me to question whether people, I mean, the data that ChatGPT uses has been scraped from the internet and from various sources, but it actually shows, in a way, people's understandings or misconceptions about these two different kinds of approaches to doing research. And because of those misconceptions, qualitative research is often viewed as not rigorous. It's often viewed as not really systematic. It's often viewed as, oh no, but we're looking at feelings and, you know, it's just our own interpretations and so on. And I'm hoping that I can bust that myth in the short presentation that I have today. I don't know if I have enough time to do that, but hopefully in my getting you to the point where you think qualitatively, I hope I'm not shifting you from serious statistics to happy feely and so on, but from serious statistics to serious research of a different kind. That's what I'm hoping we will get out of today. Okay, so when I look at qualitative and quantitative, for me, they're actually two ends of a continuum. And if you look at them in that way, you see that these two can actually complement each other. These two actually need each other, in other words. So if you do one without doing the other, you're doing one part of your study, and it's fine. You can do that one part of your study, but recognize that there is more that you could have done. That there's other aspects that you could have explored, could have investigated in order to get a fuller and deeper understanding of your study. Okay, so I actually motivate that rather than saying, I'm doing a qualitative study or I'm doing a quantitative study, we look more at what the research problem calls for and think about qualitative and quantitative as types of data. So I'm looking for qualitative data for this study in order to meet this purpose in my research. Or no, I actually need quantitative data in order for me to be able to answer this research question and meet the purposes of my study. This will help you to select the right methodological approach and the kinds of methods that will get you to the type of data which will help you to answer the research questions and meet the purposes of your study. So if you think about it in that way, think about qualitative and quantitative as types of data rather than as, I know tons of research methods books will look at them as research approaches or research methodologies and so on, and that's absolutely fine. But for our purposes today, just thinking of these as types of data and what kind of data do I need for my study? Does it need to be qualitative? Okay, so if it's qualitative, what methodology would actually get me to that kind of data? So if a method leads you to a particular type of data, text data or numbers, then the method is considered qualitative or quantitative, respectfully. Okay, so this idea of a continuum helps you to see how the two can actually speak to each other, right? So when we're looking at qualitative approaches or qualitative data, we are concerned with depth. So going deeper into the research phenomenon and understanding it in a way that you wouldn't be able to understand it if you looked at just the breadth. Okay, so how wide does it extend? That would be quantitative. But how deep does it go? That would be qualitative, which is why I'm talking about how the two can possibly work together, do possibly need each other. So as we all know, qualitative is more language oriented. So the kind of data that you get is data that relates to language, whether it's text or it's videos or some other language related. Sometimes it's even pictures, but you need to translate those pictures into language so that you're able to analyze them and write about them. Whereas quantitative is numbers oriented. And then qualitative data, small sample in natural settings. So you go to the people or explore a particular event or whatever the phenomenon is, you are exploring it in its natural setting. So you're not pulling or drawing anything out of the natural setting. You're studying it there because you want to understand how it interacts with the context, but you're also interested in understanding, in going deeper and understanding how it actually plays out within that context. In quantitative studies, it's about large samples and controlled variables. So the context or the setting may also still be a natural setting. So you may, for example, go and study plants in the forest without removing them from that particular space, but you will try to put some level of control in terms of the variables that you study so that you are able to see the relation between those variables, the causality, and things like that. But the sample is always large so that you're able to make assertions out of it. Otherwise, if the sample is small, then you can't make the kind of claims that you would make with a larger sample. In terms of qualitative research, the researcher is the instrument. You can't run away from that, from the fact that it is subjective as a result. So I come into the study, I decide what I'm going to study, I select the methods, my assumptions and my biases are going to be part of that study, and that is fine. The important thing, as I'm going to mention in the next few slides, is that you as the researcher actually reflects on what those biases and assumptions are and make them explicit for the people who are reading your work or reading your research. Okay, so the purpose with qualitative studies is not objectivity. I know some will make that claim, and I am sorry if you have a supervisor who makes that claim as well and insists you need to be objective, because it is not possible. If we look at it that way, it is actually possible to argue that even though quantitative studies claim objectivity and will apply the various methodologies and approaches in an objective manner, true objectivity is not always possible. And to prove that, you can take a particular research idea, take a research hypothesis, for example, give the same hypothesis to 2 or 3 different people and get them to plan and run the study. The results are going to be different, even if they use the exact same approaches and methods and so on. But even if you just give them the hypothesis, the actual approaches they are going to select may be different. And to me, that points to a certain level of subjectivity, because as the human researcher, you're making choices about what it is that you're going to do for your study. And the choices you make are going to determine how the study is going to go. I think in qualitative research, we're just explicit about that, and we refuse to claim objectivity of our studies, but rather we're explicit about our own biases. Okay, and then in qualitative research, our purpose really is coming up with thick descriptions or narratives. And when we say thick descriptions, we're actually saying, I'm not just telling you about, if I'm looking at experiences, for example, I'm not just telling you about this person's experiences. Okay, so I'm not going to just say, oh, this is how Nompilo experiences supervision. I'm going to look at the why and the how. That's what I'm going to be looking at. So why does she actually experience them in that particular way? And I'll get to the theoretical application just now. But in that thick description, I have to bring in theory because that allows me to move the explanation or that narrative beyond just the context where I'm studying it. Since I've selected such a small sample, because I'm going deep in that small sample, I have to find a way to take it beyond that sample so that other people can be able to draw lessons from it. And the theory helps me to do that. But that theory ends up being part of my thick descriptions, which explain the experience, explain the context within which it happens, explain other interacting factors which are important for us to understand, whether they come from history or they come from politics or they come from the person's background or they come from some other interactions that they have within that space. All of those become important in order to come up with that thick description that tells the story in such a way that it answers the research question, yes, but it also gives us quite a deep and rich understanding of that space. With statistics, the purpose is completely different. Here, I'm looking at how many or how much, and I'm going to use descriptive or inferential statistics in order to do that. And in my use of statistics, remember, as I've already mentioned, and as of course you already know, I would need a broad range, a really broad population and a large sample from that population in order to make inferences from those statistics. Otherwise, especially when you come to inferential statistics, they become useless and you cannot make conclusions from them if the sample is not large enough. And then interpretive or critical understanding is the purpose. And what we mean here is that as the researcher, I'm actually interpreting what comes out of the study. So I am making an assertion that based on this data that I have collected and these approaches that I am using, this is my interpretation of what comes out of the study. And then in terms of quantitative research, I'm looking for explanation and prediction. That's what I'm looking for. So as I'm looking at the data, as I'm looking at the statistics that have come out from it, I want to explain a particular phenomenon, or I want to predict beyond the phenomenon. What is it that is actually going to happen in the future? Sorry, I forgot to explain the critical understanding. In terms of the critical aspect, sometimes it's not just about interpreting what is going on there. You can interpret and tell the story, but sometimes it's about critiquing what is actually going on within the particular context in terms of the particular phenomenon. And that will be the purpose of the study, of the qualitative study. My last point there is around, so what happens beyond the study? With quantitative studies, as we all know, the important aspect is generalizability. So can we take those results? Can we take the findings of the study beyond just the study itself? What do they mean for the particular field? What do they mean for knowledge within that field? Are they moving us forward in some way? And with statistics, it's quite easy to do that and to show how this is generalizable beyond this particular population because of the size of the population and the related sample. With qualitative studies, it is more difficult to do that. I mean, I've seen students who will claim generalizability of their studies. They have 10 participants. The population is maybe lecturers at Stellenbosch. There's, I don't know, 300 or 500 lecturers. You cannot make a claim about generalizability in that particular instance, but you can make a claim about application beyond the study. And that is if you have explained the context quite well. That means others who are in similar contexts, similar circumstances, can see how that applies in their particular spaces. Or if you've made, I spoke earlier on about using theory. If you've used some kind of theoretical lens, then that theoretical lens helps you to move it beyond just the study. You can say, okay, so this applies in this way to this particular theory, or it challenges the theory in this particular way. Then others are able to challenge the theory or to use it in similar ways to yours because of the way that you have used it. So when you look at the purposes and the approaches in qualitative and quantitative studies, then you can see that I don't think the two are pulling in different directions. I think they are doing different things, but I think they are able to complement each other in some way. And it's important to think, okay, so this is the purpose of my study. If this is the purpose of my study, which approach would help me to actually answer it? Maybe both. That means drawing on a mixed methods kind of design, or maybe one more than the other, or maybe I start with the one and end with the other. It doesn't matter. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to thinking qualitatively and what that actually means. I've already started and alluded to a lot of the things, like the importance of the researcher as the instrument, what the purpose of qualitative research really is, interpretation and critique and so on. But I'm going to look at it from a very specific kind of framework. You may have heard it or not, but I'll try and explain it in very basic language, because of course, in social science research, we try to be complex for no reason at all. So I will try and explain it in such a way that we all understand what it is. So I'll use Popper's three worlds framework. So Karl Popper was a philosopher who lived from 1902, passed away in 1994. He's actually known in both the natural and social sciences, but in the natural sciences for his views on the falsifiability of research. He says true science. I should have written the actual quote. I don't have it here with me, but he talks about how for something to be called true science, it needs to be falsifiable. That means someone should be able to challenge it. Otherwise, it's not true science. If we say, no, this cannot be challenged, then that's not true science. And that's an interesting thought when we look at all the fake news and everything that is happening around us right now. But anyway, so he's well known for that. If you look at Popper and falsifiability, that's probably what will come up first. Okay, so he proposed the three worlds framework to explain how knowledge of reality can be understood. And when we are looking at qualitative research specifically, I think his three worlds framework becomes even more important. A lot of students that I've worked with, whether it's master's or PhD students, I find that they get stuck in only one of the worlds. And I'll explain them just now. And it gets really difficult for them to move to a point where they can effectively do qualitative research. And as we're thinking about thinking qualitatively, it's important to understand what those different levels are in order to make sure that as you're thinking about your qualitative study, as you're planning it, as you're structuring it, you make sure that you're working at the right world level, if I can put it loosely like that. So the first one he talks about is the physical world. The physical world is, for example, this water bottle. I hope you can see it. Let me look at the screen to see what you're seeing. Okay, yes, you can see it. This water bottle that I'm holding here that a friend gave to me. All right, so looking at this water bottle, it's something that is visible. It's something that we can all see, something that is pragmatic. So we can see it, can't really smell it, but we can experience it with our senses, right? And when we're looking at it, I don't know what it is that you recognize first about it. Maybe it's the color. I like the color of it. Maybe it's the size. Maybe it's its function. That's what you recognize first about it when someone holds it up for you. But the question that I want to ask, okay, before I ask the question, in the physical world, it's about the pragmatic, the things that we see on an everyday basis, the things that we experience around us. That is the physical world, the layperson's world, if I can put it in that way. But the second world, his world two, if I can call it that, yeah, rather than second world, let me call it world two. His world two is the world of human experience. So in other words, I would ask the question, what do you think about the bottle when you see it? So when you looked at it, you saw its color, you saw its size, you saw its function, or you realized its function. Some of you may not have realized the function if you've never seen a water bottle, for example. For argument's sake, if someone has never seen a water bottle and they see this, they may ask themselves about the function and not be sure what that function is. But when you're now moving to world two, the world of human experience, it's now about how I perceive the water bottle and what emotions that water bottle elicits. What mental state am I in? What do I think about when I see that particular water bottle? And that's the question that I'm actually going to ask you to answer in the chat. I'm just looking at my time to make sure I have enough time for what I want to cover. But yes, I would like to see, what are the perceptions that come to your mind? What do you think about when you see the water bottle? Just a few answers in the chat, please. Let me open my chat so that I can see if there's been anything posted there. Fresh water, someone says. Quenching thirst. They're running away from me, these responses. Fresh water, quenching thirst, color, size, length, material. Its usage. Trout, someone says. That's an interesting one. Someone says the slide is not moving. Are we all seeing the 𝗂𝗶𝗁 slide by any chance? I hope so. Luther, are we seeing the 𝗂𝗶𝗁 slide?
Okay, Doc, from my side, I'm still seeing the slide that's differentiating qualitative from quantitative research.
Oh no.
And I've seen a few comments, yeah. So maybe perhaps just try moving back and forward again and see if it changes.
Okay. I hope you saw the table at least. Thank you for that. Let me just see. Can I just try sharing my screen again?
Yes, you can do that. That usually helps.
Dr. Shimmer, I don't know if you want to leave the session and then come back, because it also appears that you're frozen on our screen. So colleagues, we're just working out a quick glitch. It seems that our presenter is frozen. So we'll just quickly ask her to leave and then come back in the session. So it's not your screen. We're just going to try and sort out a bit of Wi-Fi problems. But please feel free to also ask other questions in the chat in the meantime, and we'll address them soon.
Okay, I see there's a hand up, English. Would you like to say something? You've been unmuted. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Apologies, it was wrong.
Okay, no problem at all. It happens.
Hi everyone, my sincerest apologies. My computer is refusing. It refuses to okay, I hope you can all hear me. So I've actually joined on my phone now because my laptop is refusing to do anything related to Teams at the moment. So what I'm going to do, Natalie or Luther, I'll just quickly send you my slides and then I'll just continue the presentation if that's okay with you.
That would be excellent. If you can share the slides, then we will be able to share the screen and then Luther will be able to go through them. So that would be excellent.
Okay. I'm so sorry, this is now delaying everything, but it is technology and that's why we love it. I'll just reply to one of your emails and then just put my slides there.
Thanks.
Decent. There we go. Okay, thank you. But in the meantime, I will just continue while I wait for that, and hopefully my laptop will wake up before the end of the session. Otherwise, we will have to make do with the phone. All right, so I had asked some questions about the, let's see, healthy lifestyle, someone says.
I haven't got the net. Have you got it?
Safe water, healthy lifestyle. My thoughts about it are circled around the explanations you made. So in other words, I already fed your understanding of what the bottle needs to do. Eco-friendly health. So that's quite interesting for me to see all of these different explanations and realize, okay, sorry, my computer's connecting now. And I'm so scared to transfer to this device if it dies on me or refuses, then I'll have to connect again. Let me just see. Sorry, I'm back on my laptop, just trying to share my screen again. I hope you can all see it.
Yes, we can. It's perfect. We've also received the slides. So if it does have a problem, we will have backup. Sorry, everyone. Thank you.
My apologies. We've all worked with technology long enough to know that these things happen, even with the best of intentions. Yeah. Okay. All right. So anyway, the perceptions are quite interesting and they're different from each other. Some are thinking about health, some are thinking about eco-friendly bottle and so on. But those perceptions are based on our experiences. And in some instances, as one person showed us, those perceptions actually came from what I had already said about the bottle. And maybe if I had just shown you the bottle and not said a word and asked for perceptions, some of you may have had different perceptions. So some may think about a hot day and being thirsty, or someone sweating because they've been exercising. They may think about health. Some may think about a cold day and warm water. I actually use mine for hot water with lemon and turmeric and other weird things. You would not want to taste my water. Some might actually think about sickness when they see a water bottle, but that perception is based on my experience or my understanding of the context or what I know about the bottle or how I've used it or how I know others have used it. Okay. And then his third phase, okay, so now I can actually go to these. There's the physical world, which is the pragmatic, and then there's a human experience, which is our perceptions and our emotions, our mental states, and so on. And then there's the objective knowledge, which is world number 3, world 3. So world 1 is the pragmatic world of the physical world that we can see and feel and touch, and that we can all generally agree on. But the human experience world is a world of perceptions and emotions, the world of dreams, the things that are within us, okay? And then world 3 is the world of objective knowledge. So when I think about water, for example, when I see a water bottle, I could think about maybe its manufacturing process. So the manufacturing process for this, to me, would symbolize objective knowledge about the water bottle. So no matter what I think about that objective knowledge, it will always stay the same. It's never going to change, all right? So I might think about objective knowledge about the water itself. So in other words, I might think about the function of water within my body. I might think about the water cycle, for example. Those things are objective. Whether I know them or I don't know them, whether I perceive them or I don't perceive them, they continue to exist. There's never a time when those do not exist. Okay, so what point do I want to make? I want to make the point that whether or not I'm aware of them, they exist. So even if no one has discovered them yet, for example, before the water cycle was ever discovered, that didn't mean it did not exist. It actually existed. But once it was discovered, then it became part of what we classify as objective knowledge about water. Before we understood how important water was for the body, for the human body, it doesn't mean it wasn't important. It was already important. We just didn't know about it because knowledge about that is objective knowledge. I hope I've made that difference clear. Okay, so people have used this 3 worlds framework in quite different ways. And Johan Mouton, who's based at Crest in Stellenbosch, has brought it home in a really nice way in terms of understanding how we perceive research, and particularly qualitative research. And I'm going to show you some of his ideas, although I've added some of mine to the next slide, which I hope you can all see. Can you see a silhouette? I'm assuming yes. Okay. So I'll just say when I'm moving to the next slide so that people can let me know if they can't see it, if they can or can't see it. All right. So I'm going to look at this 3 world framework more from a research kind of orientation, getting us to think about how we think qualitatively in research. Okay, so this is you, the silhouette. You are gold today, the colors of Stellenbosch. So in world number 1, that's the pragmatic world, all right? What is it that we're actually interested in? We're actually interested in objects and events in the material world. So we're looking at the world within which we live, and we are going in that world, going to experience it in particular ways. We're going to see things that happen within that world, and we're going to have lay knowledge about that world, and we're going to understand that knowledge in particular ways. But it's important to understand that this is everyday knowledge or everyday experience of events, of people, of objects, and so on. That's what it is. And it is important to remember that most of our research studies, particularly qualitative studies, come out of this. They come out of things that happen on a daily basis because we are studying the natural world, or rather natural settings, natural social settings in most instances. And people already have particular understandings of that natural setting. And it's important that we shift them to world two. Well, we don't have to shift them, sorry, but we shift our ideas to world two in such a way that we can be able to study them, okay? So it is important to make that distinction. Things happening within the natural world, within our lives, within our everyday moving up and down and interactions, and things that are actually researchable, things that can become scientific. Okay, so in world two, we identify and separate a particular item, event, or person for the purpose of scientific inquiry. So I'm looking at this whole context within which things are happening, multiple things are happening at the same time. And in order for me to be able to research it, I can't research every possible thing that is happening there. I have to make a selection. I have to identify it and figure out, okay, so this is the thing that I'm identifying for research. And this is why this thing is an issue. And this is how I'm actually going to approach my study of this thing. And this is why it is important for the field of knowledge. And actually, it is based in this particular field of knowledge. Okay. So for example, I'll go back to my water bottle. If I take the water bottle again, and I want to study the water bottle, I'm going to study that water bottle differently, depending on which field I'm coming from, depending on which lens I want to use to study the water bottle. Am I interested in the mechanics of it? Am I interested in the building of it? Am I interested in what is within the bottle? How long does the water stay hot if I put in boiling hot water, and so on? Am I interested in the number of times that it's used? Am I interested in how people experience it in various contexts, and so on? It's still the water bottle, and I've identified and separated it. But in my identification and separation of it, in essence, I'm actually identifying a problem, maybe not necessarily with the bottle, but maybe with its relation to the social context, so that I can be able to get to a point where I can study it, where I can research it. So as I'm thinking about how it's going to be studied, as I'm moving from more pragmatic to scientific interest, then I'm starting to apply systematic approaches, or to think about systematic approaches that I can use to study it. Okay, I hope that's clear. The third world, I keep saying third world, world three, not third world. World three is then the meta-scientific world. And in world three, I am thinking about science, or thinking about how I approach the research. That's what world three is about, the meta-scientific interest. So critically thinking about the research process and the results that will come out of the study. So in other words, everything that I'm going to do in my study, I need to have thought about it. I'm not just going to apply particular approaches without thinking about the effects of those approaches, without thinking about what happens within the space around of those approaches, and so on. There's a lot that I need to think about, and I'll mention just a few as we go along now. One of the most important things that you'll need to think about is the research paradigm. Okay, when I introduce that in our qualitative research courses, I don't know, it's like a curse word because people start panicking, but actually research paradigms are not that difficult and quite straightforward. And if we do have time at the end, I will introduce a couple to just a few to you. So research paradigms help you to think about yourself and the way that you're going to understand the study. And you make a decision about which paradigm you align with. And when you're making that decision, you're actually basing it on your own values as a person. You're basing it on the research approaches that are available to you. And I'm going to explain that in more detail just now. But the important thing to mention now is that when I'm selecting a research paradigm, and I'm looking at the research problem, am I interested in just understanding what's going on within that space? Do I want to critique it in some way? Do I want to transform it in some way? So all of those are based on my values as an individual, and all of those will help me select a paradigm that will be helpful in helping me think about the science of my research or the scientific merit of my research. Ethics is also another overarching idea, because when you're approaching your study, you have to think about the ethics of your study. You have to think about the choices and decisions that you make and how they are going to have, and what ethical implications they're actually going to have on your study. You have to be reflexive as a researcher. This means you need to think about and make conscious choices about your study. So you're not just going to go in and make choices. You need to be able to motivate all the choices that you make. In qualitative research, there's so many possible options, but the choices that you have made need to be reflexively motivated. At each stage, you are telling us, you don't have to tell the reader, but you have to reflect on your biases, you have to reflect on your assumptions, you have to reflect on your own values, and how all of these, and even your background knowledge, and how all of these have combined to bring you to the choices that you have made about your research study. So all those are meta-scientific decisions, the ones that help you think about the science of your research. So in other words, critiquing your own thinking about your research. That's what meta-science is. I'm actually going to pause here a little bit. What's the time? Oh, I don't have much time left. Okay, no, I can't pause. My apologies. Let me actually just get to the end, and then I'll take some questions. I don't know why I thought I was about halfway in terms of time, but it's fine. I thought I was about halfway now, but it's okay. All right. So the reason why I actually wanted to pause here is because I wanted to see if we have an understanding of this concept of what I mean when I'm talking about this 3 worlds framework. The pragmatic world. So these are the things that we see within our context and experience, the events, the objects, the people, and so on. The scientific world, where we identify something from that pragmatic everyday world that we're going to study. But as we are planning how we're going to study it, we use systematic approaches, we plan rigorous approaches, and so on. And then the meta-scientific, where we're thinking about our own thinking or critiquing our own thinking about the science of our research. So I hope that's clear, because my next slide had some questions. But sadly, I don't know that I'll be able to go through all of them. But I'll just ask you to think about them, please, because they're really important in helping you think about the choices you make for the qualitative study that you may have in mind. Okay, so this is a picture from Time magazine, came out a few years ago, taken using a drone, and the photographer here took pictures of several cities, several big cities. I think he's got Durban, he's got Joburg, he's got Cape Town, where you see stark evidence of just about one of the most unequal countries in the world. Where on one side of the street, you see what you see. I'm not going to describe it because I don't want to again influence how people are going to answer the questions that I'm going to post now. And then on the left-hand side, you see quite a different picture. And the question that I'm thinking of, I have several questions for you here that I want you to think about, okay? So if you had to come up with a research problem, based on the picture that you see here, right? So in which of the 3 worlds do you see your research problem located? Is it pragmatic? Is it based on something that you see on an everyday basis? Is it already scientific? Or are you actually thinking more at a meta level already right at the beginning, which is possible? There are some research studies that start from the meta level, although it's quite rare, but it is possible, and then flow down to world 2 or world 1. Okay, so I want you to just think about that. Think about your own discipline, actually, and what kinds of things you'd be interested in researching here, and where those things would fall. All right. When I've used this picture in different classes, unfortunately, we won't have time to go over it now, unless there's some people who have posted something in the chat, which I will check now. Okay, human experience of what? So if so human experience of what exactly? Is it human experience of, I don't know, water supply in both areas? Is it human experience of schools within the two areas? I mean, I've had some quite interesting responses in various courses that I've run. Some are interested in the plants in both areas, where they grow, how they grow, what kinds of plants are there in terms of grass and trees and so on. Some are interested in the infrastructure in terms of roads and that kind of thing, and like so many different things. Some are interested in looking at labor, the labor market, and looking at people who live on the right-hand side and work on the left-hand side. Some are interested in crime statistics and what it means on the right-hand side, but also what it means for the left-hand side. But the options are endless. Looking at a picture like that, the options are endless. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that you look at an everyday event, and you have to make a choice from that everyday event, what it is that you're going to separate for your own study, what it is that you're going to identify and separate for your own study. Okay, so I'll just list the other questions, and I'd like you to think about them in your own time. You can take maybe a screenshot. There are 4 questions, so you'll see when they're all there. So if it is located in world 1, how would you actually shift it to world 2? Okay, so in other words, if it's quite broad, like for those who have said human experience, that's quite broad. But human experience of what specific thing? How would you separate, identify that one item that you're selecting out of the wider domain, and then identify the discipline, identify the related literature, identify the scientific approaches that you're going to use in order to do that. And then what aspects of World 3 are critical to consider for your research? So in other words, are you going to consider reflexivity? In other words, are you already making, and this happens a lot, are you already making assumptions about either the left-hand side or the right-hand side of the picture before you even go into your study? And that's fine. We're not saying it's wrong to make the assumptions, but we're saying it's important to be explicit about those assumptions. Are there any ethical issues that you need to consider? So in other words, is anyone going to be marginalized by you doing the research? If you're going to ask particular persons certain questions, is it going to bring thoughts in their mind about maybe their lack of power or something to that effect? What ethical concerns could there be when you're looking at your study? And then my last question is, can the research problem emerge from world 2 without world 1? So can you identify a research problem in the qualitative space without actually a particular context where you're studying it? So you haven't observed anything in everyday life that is researchable, that is studyable, if I can put it that way, or that is of interest to you, and you identify something from world 2. Okay, so unfortunately, I will now have to give you the answers to these questions because we're out of time and I want to give people time to ask questions. And I actually have 3 more slides, so I'll quickly go through them. Unfortunately, we lost time when I lost access. Okay, so in terms of the last question, I would say actually yes, it is possible to start with the research problem from World 2 without necessarily World 1 initially, okay? But it doesn't mean then you separate from World 1 completely. In other words, I can be reading my research and looking at papers and so on and trying to figure out what I want to research. And I realize that 3 or 4 or 7 or 10 researchers identify something as an issue. And I think, oh, okay, so this is actually an issue. But I now need to go back to World 1 and figure out if I want to study this, in which context does this actually take place, where I can collect data and maybe even implement the results of the study, which would change the situation for the better for the people who are within that context. So in other words, you can start from World 2 without World 1 initially, but it is important that you shift back to World 1 in order to be able to carry out that study. Okay. All right, I'll move on to the next slide. If during the questions anyone would like me to go back to any of these, please just let me know. Okay, so in order to move from World 1, which is the layman, everyday kind of language, to World 2, research scientific, you have to think about what kind of research problem is researchable and how does it align with the purpose of the research. Okay. And in order to do that, you have to figure out what the main purpose of your study is. I've listed on this slide, I've listed 4, but there are actually more. These are the 4 main ones. And I've found for students who have not worked with qualitative research before, it helps for them to think about where their study could potentially fall here. Because if you can figure out where it falls among those 4, it helps you to start to figure out what kinds of methodologies would help here, what kind of research paradigm would work here, what kind of methods, how would I analyze that data, what kind of questions can I ask? Okay, so the first one is explore. Okay, if your research purpose is to explore, then the primary purpose is actually to examine something that is not well understood, so that you can develop some preliminary ideas and move toward refined research questions. So you're focusing on the what, and you're focused on describing. You know that there are actually whole PhDs where the purpose of that PhD was to better explain a research problem. And you're better explaining it and its components and its complexities and its nuances so that others can come and actually research that problem. Describe. So the primary purpose is to actually paint a picture using words or numbers in order to present a profile, classification of types, outline of steps in order to answer questions. And those are the kinds of questions. So you're describing something that is happening within the research context. Explain is another one. And the primary research purpose here is to give an explanation of why something has actually occurred. Usually, you are building a theory or testing a theory or extending, or elaborating, or even challenging a theory. And you're asking the why or the how questions. Quantitative studies also fall here, but there are also qualitative studies that are very interested in the why and the how. And then transform is the fourth possible purpose of a qualitative study. If my purpose is to change the context or phenomenon in some particular way in order to overthrow some oppressive powers or structures and help some people who are marginalized, then transformation is the purpose of the study. And if you are looking at these 4, it's important to think about where your study falls, as I've already said, and if I've identified a particular context, my world one, this is the context where I want to study, that I want to study, this is the kind of thing that I'm interested in. But for that thing, is it well understood? Maybe I just want to explore it so that I can better explain what the issue is. Or maybe I want to describe it so that people have a better understanding of what it actually is, or I want to explain it, or I want to transform it in some way. That helps you to begin to unpack what the research questions could actually be and what approaches you could follow. I said I'll do 3 more slides, but I'll actually do 1 more so that we can have time for questions. And in my last slide, if I'm thinking qualitatively, I'm actually ensuring the scientific merit of my qualitative study. I have no idea why there's a question mark at the end of that, because that's not a question. But anyway, there are several principles that you need to consider. And I've already mentioned some of them, but I'll go over them quickly now and then we will close. The first one is that the approach you select must be systematic. That means it follows a structured approach. If I'm going to pick, I don't know, a case study, students love case studies, not realizing actually how very complex case studies are. If I select case studies, there are several things that your supervisor and eventually your examiner are going to be looking at in order for them to see whether that case study is, you have followed a systematic approach in applying that case study. Is it rigorous? So in other words, have I been meticulous in applying those systematic principles? So am I applying them in a sound way? Am I precise in the way that I'm applying them? Data transparency. So have I provided detailed documentation of how I actually got to this data and how the data was analyzed? I may not include all of that in the thesis itself, but it needs to be there in case I'm going to be audited. It does happen once in a while where the ethics committee decides to audit people. So it's good to have these kinds of things in place. But it also helps you to ensure that the results you get to are defendable. Okay, researcher reflexivity, I've already talked about that. It's important to think about your positionality in the study and how it influences the research. A theoretical lens, I've also mentioned this. You have to engage with existing theories to inform the research process and finding, or you may be actually developing a theory through your research. And there's a very systematic process in how you do that. You don't just decide, oh, this sounds like a theory. Is it defendable? That means the claims that I'm making about this particular study, are they clear? Are they supported by strong evidence, by logical reasoning? Is it contextualized? Have I talked about the context of the study enough for people to see how it could apply to their particular context? And are the results trustworthy? In qualitative research, we talk less about reliability and validity and more about the trustworthiness of the results that come out of the study. So we look at things like triangulation of the data, more than one kind of data. We look at things like member checking to make sure that your research participants agree that you have collected from them the data you say you have collected and things like that. But I will stop here because I would love to engage with questions and see what, I hope people have benefited from the presentation so far. Thank you. Over to you, Luther.
Thank you very much, Doc, for the interesting session. We do have a question from Daniela, and Daniela asks, how best can one do the meta-science other than reflective journals or debrief with your supervisor?
Okay, thank you for the question. So the meta-science is actually quite complex. I tried to break it down here just for the purposes of this presentation. When we're talking about the meta science, as we said, it's thinking about your thinking. When I'm looking at meta science, I'm interested in aspects related to how I understand reality. And that's where the aspect of paradigms come. So in other words, I'm saying, if I'm looking at my research phenomenon, right? Let's say I am studying the processes of manufacturing the water bottle, for example. So I may decide that I'm going to look at it from a positivist. I didn't want to go into these, but just to explain the point better, a positivist mindset. In other words, I'm saying the manufacturing of this bottle is something that is quite objective. So the purpose of my research is to get closer and closer to that objective reality. That's part of meta science. Or I might say, if it's interpretivism, if that's my paradigm, then I might say, actually, it depends who you ask in terms of this manufacturing. Everyone has got their own understanding of how a bottle needs to be manufactured best. So I'm going to ask all of these people and bring these different realities together, and that will make up the story that we're going to tell about the reality of manufacturing a bottle, and so on. So there's different ways of looking at it, but you're making a decision about how you view reality, which is your phenomenon, and knowledge about that reality, how you come to know or understand it better. That's the bottom line, the basis when I'm looking at meta science. But as you are saying, I'm also looking at reflexivity. And besides talking to your supervisor and writing reflexive notes, as you have said, there are actually some good articles that help researchers, particularly postgraduate students, in terms of how to reflect. There are certain questions that you can ask yourself in order to reflect better and to think about things that you hadn't thought about. I will post the title to one of them before the end of this session. Please just look out for I just remember it's from Holmes, but I'm not going to remember the title offhand now. And I'm going to post it in the chat. And it's one that I've shared with my students and has really been helpful for them in going beyond just saying, oh, I'm a researcher based here, and this is how I view the research. It helps you to go a little bit beyond that. So it's by Andrew Holmes, and it's called Researcher Positionality, a consideration of its influence and place in qualitative research. So I'm just posting it now, and it's from 2020. Okay, I hope I've answered your question.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So one of the participants is asking, can you kindly highlight more on your comment on the complexity of case study as a preferred research methodology?
Okay, thanks. Okay, so case study is an interesting one for me because a lot of students fall back onto it without realizing, as I said, how complex it is. So when you're looking at case studies, I'll just mention some of the principles that I'll remember off the top of my head, but would advise you to please go and read more on it. Number one of the biggest issues with case studies is that you are understanding a particular case. So you need to clearly identify what that case is. Okay, and that is something that is actually quite difficult for students to do for some reason or the other. I'm not sure why something like that. Yeah, but anyway, so the case could be an event, it could be a person or a group of people, it could be a class, it could be an organization, an institution, a department, and so on. It could be so many different things. So in the research that you're going to do, you need to make sure that you employ multiple methods in order to go deep in understanding that case. And within that case, you have to have a particular unit of analysis. And that unit of analysis is telling you, this is the thing in the case that I'm actually interested in exploring. And if you've written about case studies, and number one, you haven't identified clearly what your case is. You haven't, number 2, told us what the unit of analysis is. Number 3, you haven't told us about more than one method. So if you do interviews only, it's not a case study because you are looking for a deep understanding of the case, and interviews are not going to give you that. Okay, so off the top of my head. Thank you.
Okay, that's a good one. That's a good one. Nice advice. Then we
Sorry,
have
can I just
another...
mention this? Sorry,
Yeah.
one last thing about case studies. The other thing that's confusing about case studies is that it's usually also combined with other types of methodologies or designs. So, for example, case study is its own methodology. Ethnography is its own methodology, but sometimes you'll have an ethnographic case study, in which instance then that approach that you end up with needs to draw the key principles from both and make sure that they are clearly reflected for your examiner, because they are going to look for that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that addition. We also have another question from Heleni, who says, Doctor, can you explain a bit more on how one can go about developing a theoretical or conceptual framework?
Okay, so theoretical and conceptual framework are actually two different things. I wish I could see these questions. Oh, there we go. I found it. All right, so theoretical and conceptual framework are two different things. And because in social sciences, we want to confuse everybody else, we don't always agree on what that means. We actually don't agree on anything. If you ask us what is education, you're going to get as many different answers as you'll have people that you're asking, if not more. Okay, so my understanding of a theoretical framework is when you are bringing together different theories. It could be two theories, or it could even just be your paradigm, which is like your interpretivism and so on, with a particular theory, and you're bringing those together in a unique way in order to do your research. And for me, as soon as you say framework, then there's more than one of something. So I can't decide I'm going to use critical pedagogy, which is a type of theory, and then call it a theoretical framework, because it's one theory, unless I am in some way combining it with something else. So as soon as you say framework, there needs to be more than one. So someone may decide to bring together activity theory with another theory in a unique way, and the way that they bring it together makes it a framework. Or as I've said, you could be combining your paradigm with your theory in an interesting way. But when you talk about a conceptual framework, to me, I understand that as bringing various concepts together in order to help frame your study or some part of your study. That's what a conceptual framework would be to me. I found it quite helpful to get students to write their literature review as a conceptual framework. In other words, you are framing your literature review in order to explain particular concepts, but also explain how those concepts are related to each other. And if at the end of it, you are able to come up with some kind of mapping or some kind of diagram or some kind of narrative that explains that relation really well, then I would call that a conceptual framework. So you can have a study which has got both, especially at PhD level, or you may decide, oh, no, I'll come up with a conceptual framework to help me frame the results of the study. That is also fine. But of course, it also depends on disciplines and institutions. Thank you.
Okay, given our time, I'm going to squeeze in a few more questions, if that's okay, Doc.
Sure.
Okay, there's this one participant who says, I once came across a fundamental yet elusive statement. Research problems are social problems, but not all social problems are researchable problems. So, what makes a social problem in principle a researchable problem?
Okay, I think that question actually goes back to the comment that I made when I was talking about the three worlds view. You've got things that are happening within the social context, and that's the pragmatic world or our everyday world, the world that we view in particular ways and so on. But within that space, not everything there is researchable. And there's different reasons why things may not be researchable. Number one, it may be because that thing really is not important to people in the research field where you want to research it. So you may think, oh, this looks interesting. Seems a problem for people. Maybe something related to, I don't know, I don't want to say the price of bread because that is an important problem, but just to make a point, because I can't think of anything at the moment. So let's say the price of bread. And then you decide you're going to build a study around that. You'd need to find a really strong motivation to explain why. Okay, so it may be a problem within the context, and people may actually be finding it quite difficult, and it's making their lives impossible. But when you look at it, you find this is not valuable as a research study, because one, people may not be interested in it, as I've already said, within the research context. So even if I write about it, no one is going to look at that. And then number two, it could be maybe because you can't find a field where you can find a home for it. Okay, so there's different reasons why things may be problems within the social context, but not necessarily research problems. And even things that end up as research problems don't always start out that way. So you have to refine them in ways that get you to a point where something can be a researchable problem. And you also have to find foundational literature that will help you to frame it and to motivate why this is a problem that could be of interest to someone. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Another question from one of the participants. If you're doing mixed methods approach, do you have to adopt a position as well? If yes, which section of the methodology section will this be written?
So when you talk about position, I'm assuming you mean the positionality of the researcher?
I'm assuming so.
Okay, all right. So we will go with that assumption. I think for a study of that nature, it depends on how large the qualitative section of your mixed method study is. So if it's something that is the main component, then you'd need to make sure that the positionality statement is quite explicit and comes quite early on in the study. But then there's different mixed methods research designs. There's some which will start off with a qualitative component followed by a quantitative component. There's some that are the other way around, and there's some that give greater weighting to the one than the other. So you would need to make a decision around that. But just off the top of my head, I would say if the qualitative component is the larger of the two, then it needs to come quite early on. If not, then even later on in the study, it is important to mention or speak about your positionality as the researcher at least.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Doc. It seems like we have a lot of questions and they keep coming in, but then I'm just looking at the time and I don't think we'll be able to address all of them. So maybe this is a sign they need to attend your course, Doc.
Yes.
On qualitative research, because yeah, there are a lot of interesting questions. I wish we could go through all of them, but unfortunately, because of the time constraint, we will not be able to do so. But maybe we can close off with one more question, Doc.
Sure, that's fine by me.
Okay, so a question from Rosemary, who asks, is it necessary that each PhD study title has the independent and dependent variables for the title to be considered rigorous?
Okay, so because we're talking about qualitative studies here, I have to start off by indicating that in qualitative studies, we don't use variables. unless someone is doing an experimental design, which is very, very rare in qualitative studies. So that is my short answer. We don't usually use variables. As soon as we have variables, then it points to a heavily quantitative kind of study. Thanks.
It's just a very, very warm thank you to Dr. 𝗠𝗵𝗶 for doing such an excellent presentation, which I think you've seen by all the comments from all the colleagues that have joined. Also, to everybody that has joined the session, thank you for making the time, and we apologize for the few technical glitches that we had. However, we will be making the presentation available, so you will get that in the coming week too. And also a very big thank you to my colleague Luther also for helping with the questions. So thank you, everybody. If there's any further questions, please just post that into an email and we'll try and address it as best we can. But thank you, and we hope you have a great afternoon. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. 𝗏𝗏. Thank you, Dr. 𝗠𝗵𝗶.